So thank you all so much for being here today. It's such an absolute pleasure to invite you to West Campus for those of you that are West Campus C people. And for those of you that are not from West Campus, welcome, welcome. My name's Nikki Goenaga. I'm the Dean of Faculty here at West Campus. And because we have a few people that are with us that are not, have maybe never been to West Campus before, just a few things. If you need a restroom, it's right down the hall, water fountain right down the hall. And we, just FYI, I think you already mentioned that we do have some more students coming, but we're going to try to let them in through the back so that they interrupt you as little as possible. But it's such an honor to have this event here, for us to continue the conversation about what's happening right in our backyard. And this is such this topic is just so near and dear to me, just because nature is such a beautiful thing, and the fact that we have such an incredible ecosystem right behind us is amazing. So very much looking forward to this really engaging conversation, because I'm sure we're going to learn even more. And thank you all for being here, and I will leave it off to the moderators because we've got a lot of good conversation to have. Thank you, Tim. You too.
Thank you, Dean. You all are probably saying, what is going on right here? Who are all these people and why they're here? My name is Kimberly Jackson, and I'm the executive director for what's called a very long name, so bear with me, the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. We call it ISPS. It was created by Congressman Bill Young. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but if you don't know who Congressman Bill Young is, who is no longer with us, he was a giant of a congressional leader at our state and at our federal level, and he made sure that a lot of funds came to our state to make it so beautiful. And because of his efforts, we have this organization that sits at St. Petersburg College, but is for the benefit of the Florida college system. And we're so honored today to be able to come to Miami because it's our first time out of our little region where we're doing a program off our sites and off of our closer college and university sister sites. And your campus has been just beyond welcoming. So thank you for that time. So we thought it was appropriate if we're going to come down here to do a program on the Everglades. Jim and I have been in some organizations, and I've been really asking, I think, far too often for this assistance, and he finally jumped in to help. So a little bit more about the Institute. We do nonpartisan programming with a focus on educating students on social, political, and economics. And it is our hope to always enrich you all and engage you all with factual information and robust discussion on these issues. Okay, so we're going to get started because we have 4 incredible people who are speaking today. I have to read their very long bios, and we are recording this, so this is for the benefit of the recording, so bear with us. And also, if you would check your cell phones to make sure that they're on silent, we'd certainly appreciate it. Thank you, Miami-Dade College, and thank you, Florida International University, for partnering us for this program. So first, I'll start with Mark Chapone, who is the co-moderator for this program along with myself. He is an associate professor, senior, based at the Homestead campus of Miami-Dade College. He teaches biology classes, marine biology, earth science, and oceanography. The list is actually quite longer than that, but it would take all of the time to introduce him. He's one of the 2 lead scientists with an undergraduate research group focusing on coastal ecology. He's done graduate work at Oceanographic Center at Nova Southeastern University. He supports coastal marine protected areas in Florida, the West Indies, and Central America. He has also been with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary for 16 years and spent 11 years with the Coast Guard on public education. He has authored over 50 peer-reviewed science articles and is a professor with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary Water Quality Protection Plan Technical Advisory Committee. And I want you to know I went through this to try to figure out all the highlights, but it's a lot. So thank you. And then Dr. Todd Crowell, who is an ecologist with more than 35 years of experience working on interdisciplinary projects related to ecosystems science. He's a senior scientist at the Liquilo LTER program in Puerto Rico since 1994. He was awarded in 2012 a $20 million grant to establish Utah, a statewide effort to assist in building the human and research infrastructure needed to sustainably manage Utah's waters through the NSF. This is a long one, EPS core program. He also received $12 million from the NSF to establish a Center of Research Excellence in Science and Technology in 2023. He was awarded, along with colleagues, $9.5 million to design and build a robotics at the Autonomous Vehicle Systems Center. He's the president of the Association of the Ecosystem Research Centers, is on the board of directors for the American Institute of Biological Sciences. Also a very hefty, very hefty resume. Dr. Paul Hensley serves as the Everglades Foundation's chief economist, where he applies economics to measure and communicate the benefits of Everglades restoration and protection. He's trained in coastal marine resource economics and applies this through training to South Florida policy issues. Before working there, he served 15 years as a professor of environmental studies at Petersburg College. And finally, Jim, his is easy because he's been the chief resilience officer for Miami-Dade County. For 50 years, he served in the federal, state, and university, regional, and local governmental positions. He is a fellow in the National Academy of Public Administration and continues to serve on boards of several of nonprofits, and is all around just a good person as a new retiree. I don't know if you're retiring so well. I am an attorney by trade. I worked in all forms of law, transitioned to education at St. Petersburg College before I came here. So thank you for your time. And with that, you have the first question. Let's get started.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So the first round of questions is for Dr. Crowell, coming from the great University of FIU. So number one, given your experience with long-term ecosystem projects, what interdisciplinary approaches, combining fields like hydrology, ecology, technology, do you think are crucial for Everglades restoration to succeed in the long run?
Right. So right across the street, think about this, is the world's largest restoration program in the world. Right. That's a pretty remarkable statement, that across the street is the world's largest project, like of its kind in the world. We call these SEEPS projects, socio, ecological, economic, and political systems. So when you ask me what fields, ecology and hydrology is easy. It is the economics, and I'm sure Paul will talk to us about that. It's the political, which Jim was probably going to mention. It's all of those kinds of disciplines that are required to pull together an effort like this. The communication is really difficult. I mean, if I talk to an economist about an implied cost, they have one idea. I have another idea, right? The time frames are wildly varying, and I'll talk about that in the next question probably, when I'll talk about technology next. But and I think some of you, I'm told, are from English classes. The science of communicating science is incredibly important, and that's something we don't do very well at. People like me have PhDs and master's degrees and all these degrees, but we're never really very well trained on how to communicate what we do and why it's important. It is so obvious to us that it's important, and we have to understand all of this stuff, that we don't often or always communicate very effectively as to the importance. So for example, do you know that restoring the Everglades back towards its past operations and functionality is absolutely essential to protect your drinking water? Do you know that? Most people don't. Most people don't understand that the water that goes into the Everglades eventually seeps into the groundwater and gets into the Biscayne aquifer, which is where we get all of our water for drinking, for agriculture, for all the things we do. There's 28 miles between the Miccosukee Reservation and Biscayne Bay, and yet they are intricately related and linked below your feet. Those kinds of ideas, the importance of those two things, don't often get described and discussed very, very much. And you know, I interact with the Everglades Foundation a lot. We've got a long-term partnership, and if you listen to NPR, you'll hear one of their ads is restoring the Everglades to ensure your drinking water. And that's what they mean by that, right? That's an essential service that the Everglades provides to us. So I think this is a truly transdisciplinary problem. It's got transdisciplinary required actions and solutions. So it's really broad. It's much broader than science.
Thank you, Dr. Crowell. Next question. So you've worked with advanced technologies, drones, AI, in environmental research. How can these innovations be applied to monitor and assess restoration progress? And what challenges might arise when integrating these technologies?
And before you answer, I want to add to that. Can you tell them how do you get into the field of where you mentioned communication, or how do people get jobs? How do people engage in your field if they're not scientists, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of universities these days, I mean, there is actually a field. When I used to work for the National Science Foundation under the Obama administration, and we created a program called the Science of Science Communication. So there is a science, there is a field, and a lot of universities have that. At FIU, for example, we have a really strong environmental communications program. FAU has a really strong private-public partnership communications and engagement program. UF has a really strong communicating science program. So a lot of universities have those kinds of programs. And what it takes is a fundamental understanding of sort of those environmental issues, but then a real will and passion for figuring out how to understand those, to then digest them and make them understandable for people. Every time I come to something like this, and I'm thinking in my head, what am I going to say? How am I going to communicate it? I start with, what do I tell my mother, right? Because my mother doesn't really, as far as she's concerned, I have 5 college degrees. As far as she's concerned, I stayed in college. I never left college, and I never actually got a job, right? So, which is fine with me. But anyhow, there are lots of programs and more that are sort of emerging to sort of figure out that communications piece.
Thank you. On to his question, the AI question.
So you worked with advanced technologies, AI, drones, in your in Everglades research. How can these innovations be applied to monitor and assess restoration progress in this system, and what challenges might arise when integrating these technologies?
Yeah, and I'm really very excited about the breakthroughs that are coming in AI and machine learning and visualization and stuff like that. And I think you mentioned that we're building a brand new robotics and autonomous vehicle center at FIU up at the Biscayne Bay campus. And that's thanks to Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who understood the importance of next generation jobs, not just developing the technology, but teaching folks how to use that technology and where we're going to go in the future. I think about the Everglades like this. A molecule of air passes me in a second. A molecule of water passes me in a minute. An algae lives for a day or a week. A fish lives for a year or two. Mangroves live for decades, if not centuries. And that relationship between climate, hydrology, and the groundwater that we depend on takes centuries. That water cycle takes centuries. That's really hard to put all that together and say, I'm measuring this at the minutes, I'm looking at this in hours or days, and what I really care about is decade-long processes being restored to make sure the Everglades continues to function and functions better and protects our health, wealth, and happiness. And that's really what the Everglades and Biscayne Bay represent to us. So technology, things like AI and drones and some of the new environmental satellites are allowing us to take looks at all of those things, at all of those timescales across the vast expanse of the Everglades, and looking for patterns that our human brains aren't capable of finding. Right? I mean, I'm a biostatistician by training. I started a degree program in biology and statistics. I'm not smart enough to understand all of the interactions that occur between all of the components of the Everglades ecosystem. But artificial intelligence and machine learning, it takes all of that disparate information that we have collected and created and archived for decades and decades, and it looks for things that I never thought to look for, right? And that's where the technology, I think, is going to help us. It's going to help us cure cancer. It's going to help us restore the Everglades. It's going to help us restore and conserve Biscayne Bay and water quality. So I'm quite excited about the technological advances. There are really interesting challenges, right? Artificial intelligence is going to take more electricity than we've ever generated in the history of humankind. That's a trade-off, right?
I want to ask them to jump in too, since AI is such a broad topic. Jim and Paul, do you have any comments about how AI is going to change and provide assistance and support, or the challenges it may present from your respective fields?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think machine learning and AI are going to play a really important role in increasing our ability to make these connections. You know, what I'll talk about is kind of these extensions. You know, when we study the Everglades, it is truly a transdisciplinary problem, and so we have to understand the complexities of the natural environment, and then how that translates to benefits to people, and how it influences our lives, and some of those things we quantify and can use things like economics. In other cases, we have to qualitatively communicate that's the connection, the spiritual connection to the natural world, or the cultural connection, right, which are incredibly important and need to be part of this conversation as well. And AI is going to give us this ability, and machine learning is going to give us this ability to better integrate this understanding of how changes in the natural environment translate to people. And those are important components of these arguments that we make when we try to say we need to invest in this natural world, right? There's an importance to this. And so this is where we try to emphasize this translation of science to action, and the fact that better understanding of these links are gonna lead to more progress, right? And taking care of people in society as well as the natural environment.
AI scares me. When growing up, you guys all have an iPhone, I bet, right? We thought those were from outer space when we were growing up. I've seen that technology, and it's only going to aggressively expand. But what you're learning now at the college is about values. And I think no matter what it is, the technology that you're going to be living with, you have to have a value system to understand how to implement that. And you might get a readout from an AI that you look at and say, that's crazy. And because you've got a value system to compare that to, or even just your intuition, what your grandmother told you. Even I think in the Everglades, we are more and more trying to connect with the Native Americans. What's the word that we use for the knowledge they have?
Indigenous culture.
Yeah, and they don't have AI. That's 7 generations of oral history being passed on, and we're now realizing with all the technology we have that's valuable. It's not the only answer, but it's part of a blend of moving forward. So you guys have got the challenge. I'm glad I'm retired.
Okay. I just to insert, I've always thought of AI, these other technologies. It's, I tell my students, it's another tool in the toolbox. It's not the end all be all. It's not the panacea. So next question for Dr. Crowley, considering the significant impacts of climate change on ecosystems, and we're obviously at ground zero on this, what specific adaptive management strategies should be incorporated into the Everglades restoration plan to address both current and future climate stresses?
Yeah, I think the two biggest stressors that we already see manifesting themselves that we have to think more about and include them in our plans and stuff about Everglades restoration is, number one, the precipitation patterns are changing. So we're used to a rainy season and a dry season, but not big demarcations, right? The best models tell us that we're going to have very hot, prolonged dry seasons, followed by monsoonal rain seasons. Now that's a really different hydrology, and that's not built into the way we currently manage the water. And the South Florida Water Management District, who's charged with protecting property and life, are not ready for that kind of pulse of big water. And some of you will remember the 2020 Biscayne Bay fish kill. That came because we had a very hot summer. It was kind of dry, and then we had 3 50 to 100-year torrential rainstorms. That washed a ton, literally, of pollutants into Biscayne Bay, which sucked up all the oxygen and killed all the fish. That's going to become a common thing for us based on changes in precipitation, and we're not ready for that. We haven't thought about how that changes our delivery of water and stuff like that. And then the other obvious one is sea level rise. We are watching salt water start intruding into the Everglades. We see mangroves dying back and disappearing. They're our first defense against storm surges and hurricanes on the coastline, and they can't take constant high salinity. We're seeing tree islands. How many of you have been in the Everglades? So well, most of you have. So if I say tree islands, you know what I'm talking about. We're seeing those decay and erode as a combination consequence of rising and falling water. So it's bringing oxygen in and decomposition is occurring, plus this incursion of salinity. And salinity is changing the decomposition pathway. And so we're having what we call peak collapse and all of that. So those two drivers, I think, are the things that we know are happening, but I'm not sure we have built them into our best models and what we're doing 20 years from now.
Okay, thank you. Well, we certainly see it in the insurance market for homeowners, don't we? And so they're building in that risk already. Okay.
Yes. We're going to go over to
so,
Paul.
So I'll turn it over to Paul, Dr. Hensley. Okay, so how can we better quantify and communicate the economic value of the ecosystem services the Everglades provides, such as water filtration, flood control, to policymakers and the public in order to drive more funding for restoration?
Yeah. So Dr. Crowley made these really good points about the complexity of the system and these connections. That, you know, it's when we discuss the science, and we have to understand the science to then get to understand the economic benefits. And really, when we think of the economics of the Everglades, our program discusses in kind of 3 interrelated categories. The first is this concept of what we call natural capital. And natural capital would be a stock of renewable and non-renewable resources. So think of the trees that are, you know, we talked about mangroves, or the components of wetlands, the water supply that we have. This natural capital provides ecosystem goods and services. So these are benefits, goods like the water for over 7 million people in South Florida. The fish, right, that we eat, that we catch in our natural environment. The services, the way that the Everglades regulates the natural phenomena around us. So provides water security. We had examples of saltwater intrusion, water quality issues, and our natural environment plays an important role in regulating these processes. When we think of things like other impacts of climate change or natural hazards, so heavy flooding, and so the Everglades also plays this incredibly important role in our quality of life, recreation, aesthetics. All of these can, many of these, can be communicated and measured as economic benefits. And that's a lot of the work that we do is try to understand, well, how does this influence our economic well-being? And as we communicated before, there's this increased understanding as well on cultural and spiritual connection to the natural world. Those are really important as well, and we have to make sure to communicate those qualitatively, because economics has a little less to say about that. But when we think, as an example, our freshwater wetlands play an incredibly important role in reducing the impacts of flooding from these heavy precipitation events. In fact, there's published research that shows that this flooding in South Florida, that the benefit, the economic benefit, and reduced costs from insurance, the National Flood Insurance Program is the primary program that people will insure themselves against flooding, will reduce the cost by over $5,000 per hectare, which would be an area. So that's over $5 billion per year in reduced flood benefits for South Floridians. That's a big deal to South Floridians, especially when we have these pressures of insurance and risk in South Florida. The connection of aesthetics, the connection of recreation play a role in real estate markets. They play a role in tourism. And so there are different ways that economists try to measure these benefits to try to come up with economic values for them. Now, this natural capital, these benefits that we get from ecosystems, then play a vital role in driving South Florida's economic activity. And this economic activity is, we're a 16 counties encompass the greater Everglades system. Those 16 counties in 2023 generated over $870 billion in GDP. That's a huge number. And that's bigger than 43 US states. This kind of shows the scale of this system. It's, we often say, I think it's 18,000 square miles of area. That's 2 New Jerseys. I think analogies really help in Everglades because the scale is so large. And so we've done work with Florida Gulf Coast University to identify, well, what are these industries that are directly and indirectly tied to clean water and South Florida ecosystems. We're calling this our clean water economy. At the center are things like real estate, are things like tourism and outdoor recreation. It's at least 25% of our regional economy. And the third category is actually related to this, the fact that in South Florida, our government revenue, which drives public services, it pays for schools, pays for emergency services. Importantly, it pays for restoration of this resource. This third category is driven heavily by what we're calling the clean water economy. And so we have this virtuous cycle. And this virtuous cycle is that we benefit from the Everglades. We benefit from the greater Everglades, right? The natural environment around us. But then also for us to maintain this, we have to invest in our natural capital. We have to maintain these resources so that we can have this sustainable, resilient economy going into the future. Because as we know, if we have red tide events or blue-green algae events, tourists are not going to want to come to South Florida. Our real estate values are going to decline. Those are real economic consequences of decline of our natural system.
I'm curious just to ask, when you just say it so plainly, when you're dealing with the people who benefit from this, like, my husband hates when I use him as an example, but he's an avid cyclist who just loves everything about Florida. Do you work with, the everyday organizations like that or cohorts of people who really benefit and utilize our beautiful state to sort of be, ambassadors for what you do, what you're trying to put out there?
Absolutely. In fact, our organization is, this is actually to take a little bit of a sidestep and to get into, is that Everglades restoration has been nonpartisan, which is that both parties have been incredibly supportive, and especially recently very supportive of restoration. And part of this is because there's so many diverse stakeholders that are involved in this. And so we have advisory groups and partnerships with industry organizations, businesses, other nonprofits. The bigger tent is important because people are impacted by our natural environment. And so the more we can engage them in that process, the more success we're going to have in meeting our larger goals that we have for South Florida, which is a resiliency and sustainability in in our economy and just in our quality of life.
Thank you. One other note, you all should be receiving note cards. So if you have questions that you want to ask for the panelists, our team will pass them out. If you have questions after we get to our last panelist, then we'll start taking your questions if you have any.
Good. So another question for Dr. Hensley. So restoration efforts are obviously can be costly and expensive and complex. And so how do you assess the cost effectiveness of various restoration projects, and what role in your area of expertise with economic analysis, how does that play in prioritizing different initiatives within the Everglades ecosystem?
Yeah. So economists generally will evaluate the benefits, those economic benefits, and I went through some different examples. Hazard mitigation, so flooding, storm surge, as one example, increases or decreases in recreation or real estate values. There's a wide range of connections between the natural environment and our economic behavior, and we'll try to evaluate those benefits from the actions that we take, and we compare those to the costs of the projects that we spend money on. So when we spend money on a reservoir, or we spend money on other critical projects in South Florida related to Everglades restoration, we try to evaluate what the economic benefits versus those costs of implementation will be. And this is, again, this critical connection to our natural science, because if we don't understand the science, we can't adequately evaluate what the economic benefits are going to be. And we're learning more. So over time, we're going to learn more and more about, well, what are the benefits of Everglades restoration as it connects to changes in our climate. And so this is an evolving field. And our previous work has shown a 4-to-1 benefit to Everglades restoration. So every $1 spent in Everglades restoration has led to $4 in benefits to society, and that work really tied to changes in water quality and connections to real estate, to changes in recreational behavior. I mean, South Florida is a mecca, right, for outdoor and water-based recreation, both freshwater and saltwater, and is connected to our water supply, which again we're learning how to better measure because of the way we've given out water in the past, or had kind of quasi markets around, and so the importance of these different ecosystem services, which is what we're measuring, again, we evaluate against the cost.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what's called a good ROI, return on investment, 4-to-1. I like those numbers. Okay, so last question for Dr. Hensley. From an economic standpoint, you've already kind of touched upon this, but how can we align the policy framework for Everglades restoration with the broader economic goals for South Florida, such as tourism, agriculture, while ensuring environmental sustainability?
Yep. Our communication of the economic activity in South Florida is our clean water economy, and the value of our natural capital and our connection to South Floridians and to our visitors. And as I mentioned before, the 16 counties, the total GDP for this region is over $870 billion in 2023. A significant impact for Florida and for the nation as a whole. And the number of industries that are tied to this resource, and the number of South Floridians and the people that visit, it impacts all our lives, but we can have measurable impacts in a large portion of our economy. Again, 25% of our economy. And when we think of these benefits, I think it's important to think of, well, what are the different stakeholders? And the state, for example, the state relies on, for revenue, relies on tax revenue from mostly sales taxes is the largest. Tourism is a huge driver for the state. So the public resources we get on the state level, 10 to 15% of our general revenue comes from tourism. We rely on this. This translates to households. Your families get a benefit of about $1,900 a year in a reduction in tax burden because people want to come to Florida. That is huge. That impacts all our families. On the local level, we rely for public services on property taxes. It's $33 billion in property taxes in the 16 counties. Our property values are tied to the health of our natural environment. For most families, your home is your biggest source of wealth. You save into your home in many cases over your lifetime. Again, we are connected and our households are connected. Our personal wealth are the amount that we pay in taxes, the amount, right, of money that goes into all the services we rely on are connected to our natural environment. And it's important as we learn more about these connections, we're going to be able to make better arguments on how we have a resilient, sustainable future from an economic perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. So
I want to ask
Oh,
Jim
go
before
ahead.
you get started with all these questions. So I love when we have the opportunity to educate people. And because you have the most history here, will you give a brief explanation of what you do as a Chief Resiliency Officer? Because a lot of the benefits of, as we're going through these different seminars, is exposing students to possibilities of different career paths. So if you could just give before we go on with our questioning, talk a little bit about what you do.
What I did.
Or what you did. He's retired, but not really because you're here.
So if you took out a dictionary, well, of course, we don't have dictionaries anymore. So if you took out your phone and put resilience in, you'd get an explanation, right? The ability to come back from situations. But what happened in the state of Florida and around the country was the determination that at different levels of government, because we have a Chief Resilience Officer for the state of Florida, and all the counties in the southeast part of Florida have Chief Resilience Officers, was to add a position to county government primarily, some large cities, that would work with the elected officials, that could be the mayor or the county or city commission, and all the departments to try to build across the government's efforts a general approach to making the community more resilient. Now, often that equates to preparing for the next hurricane, right? That's another part of the country, you're more resilient if you're worried about the next fire or earthquake. So it is about planning for that eventual event. You don't know exactly when it's going to happen and how you can respond and recover. So that's part of emergency management and resilience. I think the other thing about it is that people realize that government makes decisions every day, and a lot of it has to do with spending your tax dollars. And we wanted to infuse in those everyday decisions the idea that there could be a resilience dividend, not just a single output from a single project and decision, but it happens all the time in government. So that's why I think the position, which is relatively new, if you were to you could go online in Miami-Dade County, and there's an office now called Economic Risk and Resilience that has job positions, and it shows you on a website what they do. So I don't want to go too far because I might be inconsistent with what's on the website. But it evolved, and the last aspect is it really is, while it's a new term, it builds on a lot of history that we would call sustainability or ecosystem management. It's an evolution of the way we think about how, as individuals and as a society, we can live with nature.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So first question for Mr. Hurley, with South Florida's rapid urban development, how can cities like Miami balance growth with the need for Everglades restoration, particularly in terms of water management and land use?
Okay. How many of you all live here in Miami-Dade County? Okay. So, other speakers talked a lot as their questions postured about the science and the economy. Those fields they create boundary conditions. There could be coming from a salt and freshwater boundary or an economic value. What happens when people get involved is we have this tendency to create boundary lines to create political boundaries. If you ask artificial intelligence, give me a really intelligent way to manage the Everglades, they would never tell you to create cities. That would not be the logical outcome for how you would look at nature in this constant evolution and balance. But all that's the way we work. The state of Florida created 67 counties. 16 of them are in the Everglades. Miami-Dade is the largest of all the counties in the state. It's a large geographic size Rhode Island, and it's the largest in population and a lot of tours. But because there's this tendency to want to bring decision making that affects neighborhoods and your community as close to those communities as possible, we allow for the creation of cities. So we have 34 cities in Miami-Dade County. And they can be as large as the city of Miami or as small as some of the cities out on the beach, which there's one out there that I think has less than 50. So it comes from a decision and a desire of people to control what happens around them. So they create cities and they work within the county government. And believe me, there are many levels above that. So to the question, development decisions are made by cities and counties. And they're going to be looking to try to find a balance around the issues we've talked about. But probably most importantly for them, besides listening to their neighbors and people who voted them in office, is how do they maintain that tax base? And that's the conundrum. Because in order to meet those increasing needs, they need to maintain or increase the value of the buildings, which is what we get taxed. This is a beautiful building. It doesn't pay taxes because it's a public entity. So it's all the private buildings that pay the taxes, which allow us to have the return on investment that this great community college building talks about. So the tension is, how do we develop and build that tax base in the right place? And how do we create disincentives or regulations to prevent it from impacting the Everglades? So, host of things that happen in our county. We do have an urban growth boundary, which is one tool of keeping the most intense development to the east. But I think more importantly is we try to encourage high density development where we build transportation systems. So think of a metro rail. How many of you use metro rail at any point, or the bus system? We're developing intense development around the stations along US 1 and out. Actually, there's one that comes out here to the Palmetto, right? And the largest of those is going to be at the Palmetto transit station. The idea is invest in a coordinated way to build that private value, to get our taxes to pay for this, but also in a way that doesn't have a negative impact on the environment.
Thank you. As a former chief resiliency officer, what are some key resiliency strategies that should be integrated into Everglades restoration efforts to ensure that both the ecosystem and the surrounding communities can withstand future climate-related impacts?
Well, look, we're going to talk a lot about these issues. A lot of them we have no control over. That hurricane is going to come, or we might have an extreme heat event. Now, there's a lot of science of how we got there, but when they occur, It's not because we just did something wrong that day. They're going to happen, and we have to prepare for them. And that's why we have a complex system of emergency management and other things. I think for the purposes of Everglades, it's about thinking about how do you make these investments. And we made some that had counterproductive effects on Everglades restoration. How many have driven across US 41? 8th Street becomes US 41 or Tamiami Trail, right? It was built in the 1920s. It was like the first road from Tampa to Miami. It was lauded as an engineering miracle. It stopped all the water from getting down south. It literally was a dam, and they weren't thinking about that. So now we're Everglades restoration, and this comprehensive Everglades restoration project includes elevating those parts of that road so that we can get hopefully clean fresh water back into the Everglades and finally to Florida Bay, where you have so many benefits. So we learned that, if you will, the hard way. We have now the will to fix it, but as we're going to be building new roads all the time or other infrastructure, look ahead for the conditions that infrastructure is going to have to exist in. It's going to be a hotter environment. There's probably going to be more rain, and we're going to have hurricanes. So it's anticipating that, being resilient in the future and learning from the past.
Thank you. Okay, last question. So along those lines, how do you think local communities can be better involved in both the restoration of the Everglades ecosystem and also building resilience to climate change? And what role does public participation play? And I know quite a question in shaping those long-term strategies.
I think I heard there's an environment club here on the campus.
Is there a yes club here?
Did I hear something like that?
Maybe.
Maybe it exists somewhere else. You guys are the answer to this question, right? It's not us. We can instill in you what we've learned, but you need to get engaged at the university college level. You need to take it home and talk about it in your neighbors and among your friends. And then you need to vote. If you don't vote, you're not impacting all the things that we're talking about. So the most important thing to do as a resident of Miami-Dade County, if you want to impact all these things, is to educate yourself and exercise that right to vote, and to ask the people who are running how they feel about those issues. That's number one. I think the other thing is at the local level, I know we have resilience committees at the county and city level, so you can seek those out. They would love to have student involvement or come here and hold further meetings like have been organized. And lastly, in our part of the state, the southeast part, this is Palm Beach, Broward, Dade County, the Monroe County, the Keys. It's not all the Everglades, but it's a big part of the system. We have a decades-long experience of working regionally across these county lines. And I think Tampa Bay has one, right? Tampa Bay climate effort. So if you really want to dig in, you can find all this on websites, the regional approach really helps to understand how you can be more impactful at the local level.
Before we get to the student questions, I will just add that I echo what you say about its future is, of course, for youth. And educating yourselves on issues that matter are so important, because once you have a good understanding, and you all did it better than most, of really dissecting and digesting complicated issues and making it so every day people can understand them. But once you have that command of something that you care about, then it's much more easier to make an impact, because then you really understand why you care about it. So this is for everyone, including the moderator. What opportunities are there to do community service as a teen or young adult to help save the Everglades, either through activism and incorporating others through panels or like these, or working directly with organizations? Most young people are not informed on these topics and are the future for our future for our precious ecosystems. And my apologies if I'm reading your questions wrong. Don't have my glasses with me. But go ahead. I think you got the gist of it. How do they help? Anyone?
I'll start off by saying very first step is go out to Everglades National Park Service, and say, I want to volunteer. They need help with everything. You have any idea? It's the same thing with Biscayne. We'll be out there. We were out there last week. We'll be out there Friday. But just go right to the Co-Visitor Center, which is the South Park entrance, and say, how can I help? And believe me, they'll start tasking you. That would be a great place to start. And you never know. I can say this with 100% confidence that if you volunteer, that can turn into an internship that will probably be paid, and that might turn into a job. And so you never know. And so, yeah, reach out. Don't be hesitant. That would be a good place to start.
Thank you.
Yeah, agreed. I think there are plenty of opportunities with, again, federal, state, government, local, in these kind of protected areas, as well as nonprofits. As a student, getting experience, will teach you a lot about what you want to learn, right? What you do and don't want to do, and just getting out there and getting those experiences will at least put you on the right path. And there is a need, and there's a need for your engagement, and just getting out there can be really rewarding as well. So it goes both ways. You'll get this experience, but you can really have a rewarding experience.
And I'll just say, in universities, and I'm sure in your classes, you throw around the term experiential learning. But what I say is, go experience the Everglades, go experience Biscayne Bay, go experience these incredible natural systems that you live in Florida and South Florida. Understand them and figure out what matters to you, what you feel most passionate about. Because the bottom line is, there is so much information out there about the Everglades, about hydraulic, about you name it, whatever it is. And it's hard to cut through it all and figure out. It becomes such a big, complex problem that you don't actually know where to start. But you start here. You start where what you actually are passionate about. You understand it, and you understand it in the context of what you care about, what your family cares about, and then go from there.
Thank you all. I'm going to try to lump some of the questions so we can finish on a timely matter. So how do you all see the future of the Everglades? And are there specific things students can do at Miami-Dade County for students who want to get involved with restoration efforts?
Well, so let me start by saying that, and Jim alluded to this, right? Your right to vote and making your voice heard through electing local, regional, state, and national folks is the number one thing you have to do, right? I mean, that's our number one thing, and your vote gets the information across to the people what you actually care about, right? And so that's one of the first things that you kind of have to make sure that you're playing that part. In the near future, what I want you all to think about and pay attention to is, all the issues associated with regulations and deregulations and the laws and all of that stuff.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we're going to have really about one more question. So if you all can, I'm going to try to collapse them as you add to the programming. I want to say students, the panelists will be here, at least for a little bit, right? To answer all your questions. But we're streaming for our larger audience. So we do have to finish timely. So I'll try to collapse the questions into How do we include the indigenous population in these conversations? How do we keep the Everglades safe? And how do we deal with the titanic growth that's going on in our state? And so your last thoughts as I go to wrap up here. Thank you.
As an example, we recently had the Everglades Coalition Conference, and that was at the Miccosukee Tribe Casino. We had environmental groups and representatives from different government agencies and scientists all there communicating the latest on Everglades restoration among their groups. They're key partners in this process, and they have played an incredibly important role in this process from a water quality standpoint, from communicating their cultural connections to this really incredible environment. And what we see is we're, as an organization, we continue to work to partner with our tribes in South Florida, with the Miccosukee and with the Seminoles, and they're the latest National Academies of Science report on progress towards restoring the Everglades identifies the importance of integrating traditional ecological knowledge, which we've communicated as well. So it needs to be a part of our larger communication. And I do think it's important to highlight we have these challenges, but we're also making significant progress. And part of what we need to do also is the latest National Academies of Science report highlighted historic progress in restoration. And this historic progress is the result of record funding from state and federal government. And this record funding came from both parties. And we need to continue to communicate to our leaders, our decision makers, the importance of investing in our Everglades natural infrastructure, in this natural capital that we all rely on, that you're going to rely on as South Floridians going forward, for your quality of life, for the connection to your economic benefits. So again, we're making progress, and we need to continue that. And so a big part of this message is we need continued investment. We need to continue to protect this resource.
I think a lot of us see the day-to-day impacts of a growing community. And but it's important to remember that the growth that we're experiencing is not all the same. It's not there are a lot of people who have a lot of money, who can do a lot of things. They're resilient, and if they see a hurricane coming, they just gotta get on what form of transportation they leave. A large part of this community isn't in that position. They don't have that wealth. And if we grow, we've got to deal with the housing issue, affordable housing, and raising wages to keep the income up for the vast majority of the people in the county. That's keeping a resilient community around all the things we're talking about. And we're going to you'll see it, you can see it downtown, we're going to be building vertically. We can't take this growth by just building subdivisions. So you'll see vertical growth, hopefully around transportation systems, and hopefully with an idea of providing housing for people of all income brackets. Thanks.
Thanks. Anything else to add? No?
No. Well, so it's okay. It's okay.
You can go to our next slide. First of all, I want to thank you all. It is never wasted on me that people with your level of experience, that you take time to continue to pour into students and to educate them with your the daily work you do, but also making the time to impact the next generation. So thank you all for doing that for us. You can give them a round of applause. So a little bit about, I have to do our plug. The Institute does a lot of different programming because it was Congressman Young's goal to educate the Florida college system students in particular. Interestingly, he was not an educated man. And so for a person who had such an important job at our state and at our federal level, he cared about the importance of pouring into you all. Our next program is back in the St. Petersburg area at our college. You can leave it back at the last slide, please. And it's on the aging out of foster care children and the impact it has on those people. Judge Irene Sullivan is a huge family law attorney in our area and used to serve on our board. And she's compiled a very strong panel to talk about these issues. So we want to say that all of our programs, like we're live streaming this, you can tune into them anytime, either while they're going on or afterwards. We digitize them, put them on our website, and have them for your accessibility or for the accessibility of our panelists and partners. Next slide. We're also going to do a program called the State of the Beaches, which we hope that all of you all will come if you're able to, or at least tune in. We did this 2 years in a row. Our beach mayors are very interesting and very open about their thoughts. So this should be a fun event. Al Rochelle is one of our former major journalists in the area, and he always enjoys doing this program for us. Next slide. And then we do a beach cleanup, and that is this young man over here, Matthew Lee. It was his idea 3 years ago, saying how can he invest and what could he contribute, and he wanted to contribute to beach cleanup. So we got some partners, RBC, thank you, and Keep the Canals Beautiful. What I've been encouraging him to do is to reach out to all the other coastal colleges within the Florida college system, and you all in tandem could do beach cleanups on the same day. And I think we have one other slide before we close up with our next slide is something that always weighs heavily on me, especially as we're talking to young people. I keep mentioning his name, but Congressman Young was very forward thinking. If you think about him saying that I want to leave, there's the Bob Bren Center for the University System, and there's a Lou Fry system, Lou Fry Center for the K through 12 system, and the idea that he thought I want something for you all who form a huge part of our Florida system. You all may correct me, but 600 to 800,000 students in the Florida college system, something like that you all bounce back and forth to the university system. We have a dean in the room, so you can correct my numbers. So, learning about him is an important part of our story. Our team put together a small documentary to explain who he was and why he cared so much about people he would never see, which I always value in human beings. Next slide. And finally, again, thank you. You all are our first test of doing a program on another campus. So we're so grateful for that. We are open to ideas of what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about, the type of panelists you have. If you all can take a picture and scan our QR code or connect with us on any of the platforms or just reach out to our team directly. I want to personally thank Aaron Bryce, our statewide director. We hired him a couple of years ago with this goal in mind. So it's beautiful to see this day, come to fruition. So again, thank you for your time. For more about the Institute, just please visit us at isps.sbcollege.edu.